More than 70 years have passed since the Nelson family first invited America into their living room, and the people who lived inside that television set went through marriages, scandals, tragedies, and transformations that no viewer watching in 1952 could have predicted. One of them became the first pop star in history to use television to launch a record career, and then died on a burning plane on New Year's Eve at the age of 45, at the very moment he had finally begun to find his way back. Another was abandoned by her parents as a toddler, grew up passed between 8 different families, became a Playboy playmate, married the son of the man who ran the show, and played herself doing it on national television. A third was already 90 years old when he appeared on stage alongside the original cast, a living monument to a century of American entertainment. And a fourth walked through one of the most famous football games in Hollywood history, facing off against Elvis Presley himself, and found his whole life change because of it. This is what happened to the cast of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, the families, the losses, the unexpected endings. He was the neighbor. Every great American family sitcom has one. The man from next door who wanders into the frame with a problem, a piece of advice, or a comic misunderstanding that sets the episode in motion. For 10 seasons of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, that man was Lyle Talbot, playing Joe Randolph, Ozzie's good-natured friend and companion in mild domestic disaster. He was 50 years old when the show first aired in October of 1952, and behind him already lay one of the most sprawling, improbable careers in the history of American entertainment. He was born Lyle Henderson on February the 8th, 1902, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His mother died just 3 months after his birth, and his father departed not long after, leaving the infant to be raised in the small Nebraska town of Brainerd by his maternal grandmother, Mary Talbot, whose surname he eventually adopted as his own professional name. He left home after high school to work as a magician hypnotist assistant in traveling tent shows and carnivals, then graduated to the stock theater circuit, and he never stopped moving after that. For years, he worked the road circuit. Melodramas, comedies, romances, whatever was playing, wherever there was a stage. By the time he arrived in Hollywood and made his film debut in 1932, he had already lived more lives than most actors accumulate in a full career. Under contract with Warner Brothers, he stepped into leading roles opposite some of the most celebrated actresses of the sound era, Carole Lombard, Barbara Stanwyck, Loretta Young. He was handsome, reliable, and technically fearless, the kind of actor the studios could put anywhere and trust to deliver. But as the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the leading man roles gave way to B-movie stardom, and by the early 1950s, Talbot seemed to be drifting toward the margins. And then television arrived, and everything changed. He was a founding member of the Screen Actors Guild, one of the original artists who stood up against studio power and organized to protect actors' rights at a moment when doing so was genuinely dangerous. That fact alone would secure his place in the history of his profession. But the role that made him truly familiar to mid-century American audiences came in 1955, when he joined The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet as Joe Randolph and stayed for 11 seasons. He appeared in approximately 70 episodes. Audiences who could not have named a single film he had made knew his face from their television screens with the ease of an old family friend. His personal life was tangled and tempestuous, 4 marriages before the one that finally held, to Margaret Epple in 1948, when he was 46 and she was 20. He had a drinking problem that shadowed his middle years, and he never entirely outran the sense that his talent had been larger than his career. But the marriage steadied him. Margaret, who went by Paula, became the fixed point around which the rest of his life organized itself. Together, they had 4 children: David, Stephen, Cynthia, and Margaret. His son, Stephen Talbot, who as a child actor appeared regularly on Leave It to Beaver as Beaver's friend Gilbert, later became a documentary filmmaker and journalist of note. His daughter Margaret Talbot became a staff writer for The New Yorker, and in 2012 published The Entertainer, Movies, Magic, and My Father's 20th Century, a book that finally gave Lyle Talbot the full-length portrait his career deserved. After Paula's death, Talbot moved to San Francisco to be near his sons. He appeared occasionally on television well into his 80s, lending his voice to PBS documentaries his son produced. On March the 2nd, 1996, Lyle Talbot died at home in San Francisco of congestive heart failure. He was 94 years old. He had appeared in more than 175 productions. He had been the last surviving founding member of the Screen Actors Guild. The boy who grew up with no parents in a small Nebraska town had built, through sheer persistence and talent, a career that outlasted nearly everyone who had ever shared a screen with him. Some performances in television history achieve a kind of pure comedic perfection, not through drama or complexity, but through the exact right quality of lovable foolishness. Skip Young's Wally Plumstead was that performance. Wally was David Nelson's perpetually bumbling best friend, the kind of man who generates chaos simply by existing in a room, who needs rescuing from schemes of his own invention on a weekly basis. Young played him for 10 years across more than 130 episodes, and he did it with such warm, unaffected sincerity that audiences could not help but root for him, even as they laughed at him. He was 26 years old when he joined the cast in 1956. He was born Ronald Bix Plumstead on March the 14th, 1930, in San Francisco, California. And that real surname was, in one of the show's more charming insider jokes, given directly to his character. When the producers asked what last name Wally should have, Young suggested Plumstead without missing a beat. The suggestion was accepted. In a show built around the blurring of life and fiction, it was a fitting touch. He had begun performing almost before he could walk. At the age of 4, he appeared in comedy shorts alongside Burt Lahr, already comfortable in front of a camera. He served in the Navy during the Korean War, then returned to the work he had always known. His entry into the Nelson family's television world came through the most ordinary of casting calls, but his effect on the show was anything but ordinary. Wally became one of the series' most beloved recurring figures, the comedic engine that kept the humor grounded and human across the long middle seasons. After the show ended in 1966, Young's career receded. He worked sporadically through the late 1960s and the 1970s, Adam 12, Starsky, and Hutch, brief appearances in films. But the world had moved on from the rhythms of classic family comedy, and the kind of role that had made him feel so essential was simply no longer being written. In his final years, he worked as a radio host in the Inland Empire community of Apple Valley, California, judged local beauty pageants, and lived the quiet life of a man who had found his peace away from the industry. 3 days after his 63rd birthday, on March the 17th, 1993, Skip Young died at home in Apple Valley of heart failure complicated by diabetes. The funeral was small. The obituaries were brief. But for those who had grown up watching him rescue Wally Plumstead from one catastrophe after another, his passing closed a door that had been open for their entire childhood. Before Joe Randolph, there was Thorny. Don DeFore was the original neighbor, Ozzie Nelson's bumbling, warm-hearted, perpetually bewildered friend, Erskine Thornberry. And he played the role with such natural ease and such genuine comic affection that an Emmy nomination followed in 1955. He was 38 years old when the show began in 1952, and everything in his career to that point had prepared him for exactly this, the role of the reliable, funny, decent man next door. Donald John DeFore was born on August the 25th, 1913, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the son of a railroad engineer. His mother directed plays at their local church, and it was from her that the theatrical instinct came. After high school, he enrolled at the University of Iowa, but acting was not a major study there, and he was not willing to stay somewhere that couldn't teach him what he needed to know. He left, enrolled at the Pasadena Community Playhouse, won a scholarship, and stayed for 3 years, the kind of disciplined, serious training that formed the backbone of mid-century American character acting. Broadway followed, then Hollywood, where he built a quiet but steady career as the hero's likable, slightly gullible buddy. He appeared in 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, shared scenes with Doris Day in the film that launched her movie career, and worked steadily through the studio era's final decade. When television arrived, DeFore stepped into it without hesitation, and found there the larger audiences his talent deserved. His years as Thorny on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, from 1952 to 1958, brought him to millions of American households weekly, and the Emmy nomination confirmed what viewers already knew. that this man was doing something genuinely skilled inside what looked like effortless comedy. When Thorney's role was gradually superseded by Lyle Talbot's Joe Randolph, DeFore moved on without bitterness, and within 3 years had landed perhaps the most successful second act in his career, the role of George Baxter on Hazel, opposite Shirley Booth, which ran from 1961 to 1965 and brought him a whole new generation of fans. Off-screen, DeFore had a relationship with Walt Disney himself that resulted in one of the odder footnotes in his biography. From 1957 to 1962, he was the only individual ever allowed to operate a personally named restaurant inside Disneyland, Don DeFore's Silver Banjo Barbecue, situated in Frontierland. Disney called him personally with the offer. The friendship between the two men was warm and long-standing, and DeFore served on the park's opening day parade alongside the Disney grandchildren, offering 2 of his own children as substitutes when Disney's grandchildren arrived late. These are not the kinds of details that appear in most actors' biographies, and yet they illuminate the man completely: generous, reliable, liked by everyone, happy to step in when he was needed. He married singer Marion Holmes on Valentine's Day 1942, with Judy Garland serving as the matron of honor, which in the Hollywood of 1942 was simply a Tuesday. They remained married until his death, raising 5 children in the Mandeville Canyon section of Brentwood. He served as Brentwood's honorary mayor. He was a 33rd-degree Freemason. He served on the board of the Screen Actors Guild and as president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and was personally instrumental in getting the Emmy Awards broadcast on national television for the first time in 1955. On December the 22nd, 1993, Don DeFore died of cardiac arrest at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. He was 80 years old. The man who had been America's favorite TV neighbor, twice over on 2 different shows, was gone. His ashes rest at the Westwood Village Memorial Park. His son Ron eventually published the memoir Don had always meant to write, and it tells the story of a man who found, in the most ordinary-looking roles, an extraordinary life. The story of June Blair begins before any story should have to begin, with abandonment. She was born Margaret June Blair on October the 30th, 1932, in San Francisco, California. Before she was old enough to understand what was happening, her parents had left her, and she was a ward of the state of California, growing up across 8 different families. That beginning produced a particular kind of self-reliance, and a particular kind of hunger for a world that felt stable, warm, and real. She found both in acting and in the Nelson family. Her path to the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet was neither direct nor simple. She appeared in dozens of film and television productions throughout the 1950s, episodic television, film noir, westerns, building a career with the quiet determination of someone who knew she had no safety net. In January 1957, she was Playboy's Playmate of the Month. That same year, she starred in Hellbound, a sharp film noir opposite John Russell. She appeared in The Rabbit Trap with Ernest Borgnine in 1959. By any measure, she was a working actress of real capability, moving steadily through a crowded field. She met David Nelson on the set of the Western series Two Faces West. They became engaged in April 1961, with Ricky Nelson serving as best man at the wedding that May. And almost immediately, the fiction and reality of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, a show that had always blurred that line, did what it had always done: absorbed real life wholesale. Blair, who had already appeared in 2 earlier episodes as entirely different characters, was reintroduced on October the 12th, 1961, at the age of 28, in the 10th season's 3rd episode, as Mrs. June Nelson, David's wife. No explanation was offered, no backstory was provided. She was simply there, a daughter-in-law to Ozzie and Harriet, on screen as she was in life. She stayed through the show's final episode in 1966, a run of 28 episodes, and when the series ended, so did her acting career. It was also eventually her marriage. She and David divorced in 1975. He remarried in that same year and remained with his second wife until his death from colon cancer on January the 11th, 2011. June Blair never remarried. She raised her 2 sons, Daniel and James, with the same fierce independence she had brought to everything else. In her later years, she was known to those who loved her as a devoted grandmother to Paige and an advocate for animals with the whole of her heart. On December the 5th, 2022, June Blair died of natural causes at her home in Sherman Oaks, California. She was 90 years old. The girl who had been abandoned, who had grown up without a family, had spent the second half of her life playing the daughter-in-law of America's most famous television family. There is something in that fact, something about longing and luck and the strange mercy of the work, that feels like the most honest thing that can be said about her. There are careers in Hollywood that begin in the most improbable ways, and the story of Kent McCord is one of the most improbable of all. He came to the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet not through an audition, not through a connection, not through a talent agent, but through a game of touch football. In 1961, a college friend invited him to play. The two team captains were Ricky Nelson and Elvis Presley. McCord ended up on Ricky's team. They became friends. That friendship led, within months, to his first speaking part on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. 2 words, Rick who? And those 2 words, as McCord himself has said, changed everything. Kent Franklin McWhirter was born on September the 26th, 1942, in Los Angeles, California, the son of Bert and Laura McWhirter, raised in the San Gabriel Valley town of Baldwin Park. At 10, he was working at his father's gas station. At 12, he had bartered labor at a local airport for flying lessons. He arrived at the University of Southern California planning to become a football coach, and ended up on the wrong side of a Hollywood legend instead. He appeared in the show from 1962 to 1966 as Kent, Ricky Nelson's fraternity brother and friend. He was 19 years old when he made his first appearance, making more than 40 appearances across those 4 years. At the same time, he was working the edges of the Elvis Presley film universe, uncredited parts in 5 Presley productions, the kind of bit work that teaches a young actor the rhythms of a set without yet trusting him with anything important. In 1965, Universal Pictures signed him to a formal contract. By 1967, he was appearing on Dragnet. By 1968, Jack Webb, who had watched McCord work and liked what he saw, cast him as Officer Jim Reed in Adam 12, a police drama that ran for 7 seasons and made Kent McCord one of the most recognized faces on American television. Adam 12 was unusual for its time, a police procedural committed to accuracy, to depicting law enforcement with restraint and realism that genuinely changed how a generation of Americans thought about police work. Officers still tell McCord, at fan events, that they became cops because of the show. That is not a small legacy. He became a sworn police reservist for the Los Angeles Unified School District Police Department in 2003. His badge number was 2430, the same as Officer Jim Reed's. In 2026, Kent McCord is 83 years old, the last surviving main cast member of Adam 12, still attending conventions, still talking with the fans who have followed his work for 6 decades. The boy who played football against Elvis never stopped showing up. She was born Peggy Lou Snyder on July the 18th, 1909, in Des Moines, Iowa, the daughter of vaudeville performers. She was on a stage at the age of 3. She was on Broadway in her teens. She left school before graduating, danced in the Harry Carroll Revue, and worked as a straight woman for comedians, all before she was 20 years old. By 1932, when she met the saxophone-playing bandleader Ozzie Nelson and he hired her to sing with his orchestra under the name Harriet Hilliard, she had already been performing for 2 decades. They married in 1935. It was not her first marriage. She had been briefly wed to a comedian named Roy Sedley in 1930, a union she escaped from within a year and had annulled by 1933. What she found in Ozzie was steadier and stranger, and ultimately much more consuming. Within a year of the wedding, RKO Pictures had signed her to a contract and she appeared alongside Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in Follow the Fleet, a film that established her as a genuine screen presence with the kind of warmth and personality that could hold its own opposite 2 of the most charismatic performers of the era. She wanted to continue. Ozzie wanted her to stay with the band. They chose the band. The radio program began in 1944, and for the next decade, Harriet Nelson's voice was one of the most familiar sounds in American homes. When the show moved to television in October 1952, her face became equally familiar. She was 43 years old at the premiere, already a television personality. already carrying the full weight of the image that would define her for the rest of her public life. The perfect mother, calm and competent, an apron and a coffee pot, the only props she ever needed. But the woman behind that image was considerably more complex than the character she played. Those who knew her described a woman who loved a good off-color joke, enjoyed her cocktails at day's end, liked people of all kinds without reservation, and had sacrificed a solo career of genuine potential to build something that was, when everything was measured, more enduring and more widely loved than anything she would likely have achieved alone. Whether that sacrifice ever registered as a loss is not recorded. What is recorded is that she gave the role everything she had, and that the role gave her back a place in American cultural memory that few performers of any era have achieved. After Ozzie's death from liver cancer in June 1975, Harriet moved to the family's beach house in Laguna Beach, California. She had not fully recovered from that loss when, on New Year's Eve 1985, she learned over the evening news that Ricky had been killed in a plane crash in Texas. She never fully recovered from that either. She appeared occasionally in small roles and guest spots in the years that followed. But the creative fire had been banked. She was a grandmother to actress Tracy Nelson and to twin musicians Matthew and Gunnar Nelson. And that was, in the end, where her heart was. She was a heavy smoker for most of her life, though she never smoked in public, feeling it incompatible with the image the world knew. It was a final and rather touching act of commitment to a character she had inhabited for so long, she may no longer have been entirely certain where the character ended and she began. On October the 2nd, 1994, Harriet Nelson died of emphysema and congestive heart failure at her home in Laguna Beach. She was 85 years old. She is buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills alongside Ozzie and Ricky, the three of them together one last time. The mother, the father, the boy who became a star. He was the responsible one. That was David's role in the Nelson family, both on screen and off. The older brother, the steady one, the one who watched from a reliable middle distance while Ricky set the world on fire and Ozzie navigated the gentle domestic comedies that kept the whole enterprise afloat. He was 12 years old when he joined the radio version of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet in 1949, and 15 when the television series premiered in October 1952. He grew up on screen with the country watching. David Oswald Nelson was born on October the 24th, 1936, in New York City. The family moved to Los Angeles when he was 5. He attended Hollywood High School, playing on the football team, doing his homework, and filming television episodes in between. He later studied at the University of Southern California, where he was a member of the Kappa Sigma fraternity, the same fraternity his character belonged to on the show. The line between David's life and the character named David was always thin, and the show was written precisely to keep it that way. What the show could not entirely contain was his ambition. David was not content merely to perform. From early in the series' run, he was directing episodes, learning the mechanics of production, understanding the industry from the inside out. He became a filmmaker in the truest sense, a man who understood how the machine worked and was determined to run it himself. After the show ended in 1966, he produced and directed steadily across the following decades: episodic television, low-budget films, the 1973 revival Ozzie's Girls. He worked with the material of the family business long after the family business had officially closed. His personal life unfolded in 2 chapters. The first was his marriage to June Blair, which lasted from 1961 to 1975 and produced 2 sons, Daniel and James. The second was his marriage to Yvonne O'Connor Houston in 1975, which lasted the remaining 36 years of his life and added 3 more children to the household. He was, by all accounts, a devoted father and a committed craftsman, a man who had lived so publicly for so long that privacy had become the thing he valued most. One by one, the members of his family left. His father in 1975, his brother Ricky in 1985, his mother in 1994. David was the last surviving member of the original television family, and he carried that fact with the same quiet solidity with which he had carried everything else. On January the 11th, 2011, David Nelson died at his home in Century City, California, of complications from colon cancer. He was 74. The last light of the Nelson family had gone out. There is a moment in the history of American popular culture one specific identifiable moment when the rules changed forever. When the teenage Ricky Nelson picked up a guitar at the end of an episode of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet in 1957 and sang Fats Domino's "I'm Walkin'," something new was born. He was not trying to launch a music career. He was trying to impress a girl he liked who had told him she was in love with Elvis Presley. He told her he was a singer too, then went home and recorded the song to prove it. The record was pressed. It was played on the show. America heard it and did not look away. Eric Hilliard Nelson was born on May the 8th, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey, the second son of Ozzie and Harriet. He was 12 years old when the television series premiered, a small boy with a face that the camera loved from the first moment it saw him. Audiences watched him grow up across 14 seasons, from a child into a teenager, into a young man with cheekbones that sent teenage girls to pieces, and a cool so effortless it seemed almost accidental. It was not accidental. Ricky Nelson understood instinctively what the camera wanted, and he gave it exactly that. He placed 54 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 between 1957 and 1973. He recorded 17 top 10 hits. In 1958 and 1959, he had more chart entries than Elvis Presley. "Poor Little Fool" in 1958 was the first #1 song on Billboard magazine's newly created Hot 100 chart, a record that belongs to him alone. He appeared opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin in Rio Bravo in 1959, earning reviews that surprised everyone who assumed he was merely a TV kid with a guitar. He was the first pop star to use television systematically to sell records, a business model that every musician who came after him eventually adopted. And then the world changed, and he didn't. The British invasion arrived in 1964, and the pop landscape shifted beneath his feet. He tried to adapt, moving toward country rock, forming the Stone Canyon Band in the late 1960s, recording albums of genuine quality that found small audiences and no radio support. In 1972, he wrote Garden Party after being booed at a Madison Square Garden Oldies concert, and turned the humiliation into a song about authenticity and self-determination. It went to number 6. It was the last major hit of his career. He married actress Kristen Harmon, sister of actor Mark Harmon, in 1963, and she joined the cast of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet as his wife. They had 4 children, Tracy, who became an actress, Matthew and Gunnar, twin musicians who would perform as Nelson in the 1990s, and Sam. Ricky and Kristen divorced in 1982. In 1985, he was preparing for a comeback. He had added the Y back to his name and gone out on tour. He had purchased a vintage Douglas DC-3 that had once belonged to Jerry Lee Lewis, a 14-seat plane that had already experienced mechanical issues earlier in the year but kept flying. On December the 31st, 1985, he and his band departed Guntersville, Alabama, bound for a New Year's Eve concert in Dallas. The cabin filled with smoke. The plane made an emergency landing in a field outside DeKalb, Texas, striking trees on its way down. Both pilots survived by escaping through the cockpit windows. All 7 passengers were killed. Ricky Nelson was 45 years old. He was inducted posthumously into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. He is buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. The last song he performed, the evening before he died, was Buddy Holly's Rave On. It was, eerily, the last song Holly had performed before his own fatal plane crash. Some coincidences cannot be explained. They can only be noted and mourned. He is the invisible architect of everything. Without Ozzie Nelson, none of the rest of this story exists. He created the show, wrote most of its episodes, directed all of them, produced every frame, controlled the budget, negotiated the contracts, and simultaneously played himself, the bumbling, lovable, apparently unemployed patriarch whose only function in the fictional world was to wander into small crises and muddle through them with dignity intact. The performance was effortless. The man behind it never stopped working. Oswald George Nelson was born on March the 20th, 1906, in Jersey City, New Jersey, and raised in Ridgefield Park, where he became one of the youngest Eagle Scouts in the nation's history at the age of 13. He played football at Ridgefield Park High School, then at Rutgers University, where he also earned a law degree in 1930. He never practiced law. Music had already claimed him. He formed the Ozzie Nelson Band in the late 1920s and made his big break in 1930 through one of the canniest acts of self-promotion in the history of popular entertainment, gathering hundreds of discarded newspapers from newsstands and filling out fan poll ballots in his own band's favor until they edged out Paul Whiteman and were declared the most popular band in New York. It was the kind of move that told you everything you needed to know about the man who made it. He met Harriet Hilliard in 1932, hired her to sing with the band, and married her in 1935. In 1944, seeking a way to spend more time with his growing family and less time touring, he created a radio show built around the four of them. A domestic comedy that was, from the very beginning, a deliberately blurred version of their actual life. His sons were played by professional child actors until 1949, when David and Ricky convinced their parents to let them play themselves instead. In 1952, the show moved to television. Ozzie moved with it and barely looked up from his desk for the next 14 years. He wrote and directed every episode. He controlled the image of his family with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was selling and to whom. Those who knew him off-screen described someone very different from the amiable bumbler on television. A controlling, demanding, intensely perfectionist figure who monitored every aspect of his children's lives with an authority that left little room for dissent. He kept his sons close. He shaped their careers. He was, in the private telling, the kind of father that the public version of himself would have found unrecognizable. After the show ended in 1966, Ozzie tried once more in 1973 with Ozzie's Girls, a syndicated revival in which he and Harriet rented their son's old rooms to 2 college students. It lasted a season. By then, the world he had built on screen had simply moved beyond the reach of any revival. In 1973, he published his autobiography. That same year, the first of his recurring malignant tumors was diagnosed. On June 3, 1975, Ozzie Nelson died at his home in the San Fernando Valley of liver cancer, with Harriet and his sons at his bedside. He was 69 years old. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. 2 stars, in fact, one for television and one, shared with Harriet, for radio. He is interred at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. The most famous man whose occupation no one on his own show could quite explain had, in the end, been doing the most important job of all, holding the whole thing together. There it is, the full story of the Nelsons' world, and the people who moved through it. In the end, what the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet gave us was something no one had quite given us before, the experience of watching a real family grow up, not characters, not archetypes, real people, with real marriages, real divorces, real careers that succeeded and stumbled, real losses that could not be written out of the script. When Ricky picked up a guitar on that television set and changed American music forever, he was doing it in his parents' living room with his brother watching. When David directed his first episode, his father was in the frame. When Harriet died, Ozzie had been gone for 19 years already, and Ricky for 9, and the family that had once seemed so complete and so permanent had become, piece by piece, a memory. But memories are exactly what this show created. And they have not faded. 74 years on, the Nelsons are still the most famous family television ever put in a house. And the house, in some sense, is still standing. Tell us in the comments, which of these stories moved you most? And where in the world are you watching from today? If you want to keep discovering the real lives behind the classic shows, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.